Good day. How are you? So I'm going to wait until a few people have come in. I've had a few questions, and if you've got any questions for me about sourdough starters, there's been some good questions recently on the video that I made, how to make your own sourdough starter, and I wanted to address those here. But if anyone has any other questions as well, and just maybe general chat, it's a usual sort of live stream where you can ask what you like, I suppose. But I'm going to wait until as normal. These live streams, they're very odd because we tried to do one yesterday to announce what time we were going to do the live show today, and I made a mess of it. But it's very hard if you schedule the live streams. You've then got to sit in front of your computer for ages waiting for the thing to start. And if you just do it off the bat like this, it's often not convenient for people just to join you live. So we'll try it. We're a little bit off the bat. What were the two names of the people that asked questions,
Okay,
Michelle?
so Yappy772.
So we had a question from Yappy772 and a question from
Heather Corcoran.
Okay, and Heather. So I don't know if they'll be able to come in. I don't know exactly geographically where they are, but doesn't matter. They can watch this back later. Sometimes people ask me questions that typing the answers to. I always try to reply to 90% of the comments, as you know, on Steve's Kitchen. But sometimes I'm not a secretary. I'm not a great typist. And I can spend way too long sort of typing away. I have a tart in the thumbnail, Byron. It's a beautiful, old, traditional lemon jam tart. Lemon jelly tart. We went to Torridin. I'm never going to be Torridin. Yesterday, and the Torridin baker, was just amazing. I mean, the lady there, Elisa, I think her name was, she runs this bakery in Torridin, and I've never seen such a great selection. I filmed some of it, so I'll be putting it on a vlog video shortly, but it's one of those real sort of old traditional bakers, and she had the biggest selection. I mean, you would have just like kids in a sweet store. I would say 50 maybe to 100 different cakes.
Oh yeah.
Small cakes.
And pies, big pies.
Pies. And I've had a few bites out of this one, Byron. This is a an Oreo chip cookie. You can see I've had a few. Oh look, that's quite a good section in it. So this cookie has actually got Oreo chips in it. Oreo cookies in it. Yeah, I can see that just as well. Michelle's showing me the numbers that are watching at the moment, but it's written right in front of me here on the screen. So look at that, Byron. Looks like a poached egg. I'm trying to see that, Byron.
I think is it the bit on the top?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a white chocolate button, just to add joy to an already delicious cookie. So Torridin Bakery. I mean, if you're anywhere in Melbourne, Victoria, if you're within an hour's drive of Torridin, just to go to the bakery, it's well worth it. And Elisa works super hard. And funny enough, right next door, we went into an ice cream shop. It was quite a warm day. Hi, Cynthia. Hey Byron, Cynthia, who just have a quick look. Oh, I'm doing something I said I wouldn't do, which is to put my finger in front of the camera. Oh, the scrolling stopped working. Now, why is that? Now.
Hopefully because there's nothing to scroll, because there's only a few.
No, there's loads.
Okay.
There's loads, but now a little stroll. So I was in the flow there, just saying good morning, good and hello. So we were in this ice cream store. There was like and they had 40, it said on the sign, 40 varieties of ice cream. And it looked like one of those old style Italian gelato stores with all the multiple pans of ice cream in there. Because it's low season at the moment, they actually only had 30 flavors, but that's still a lot of flavors, but they were delicious. And we'd already gone into the original Torridon fish and chip shop to try their chips. And I called in and there was a young lad in there, Jacob. I forget his name, sorry if you're watching. Began with a J, it was either Justin or Jacob. I have got a note of it, so I will make a correction. But there was a young lad in there, and he was showing me the ice creams and giving a taste. There was like this old English toffee. There was a salted, what was the salted one?
Rock salt caramel.
Rock salted caramel. So some comments coming in there. Hi, Soap Lady. No, you haven't missed us. So there was a rock salted caramel, there was an old English toffee ice cream, there were the usual, there were 30 different flavors, and there was a whole bay of ice creams that were not yet, hi Paul, they were not yet actually made because it's low season, they're not really into their full summer season. Anyway, the young lad said to us, or his friend actually said, you should go next door and try the cakes because they have the most amazing selection of cakes. And we didn't straight away. We had a little walk around the town, and then I went into the cake store, Elisa's cake store. It was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, it was just something very unusual. So I've got my pen here, my new Note 9 pen. Want to let her out? You want to say hello, Michelle, because you're going to go past.
Hello, everybody. I'm just letting the dog out.
So something really unusual. I don't know why it is in Australia. You can tell me if it's the same where you are, but very few bakeries or cafes or anywhere you go, they'll put all their cakes up in the windows. Never ever put their prices on. I'm not talking like the occasional one, but almost 95% of cafes never put their prices. So you can see all the things, and you've got to say, oh, how much is that one? Oh, how much is that one? Oh, how much is that one? Now, I guess the concept is that most people nowadays really don't give a damn about the cost of food. We still do. So if you're in our realm of the world where you actually don't just say, oh, I'll have that cake or that pie or that sandwich without knowing the cost, and then you suddenly go to the counter and it's sort of $40 for a sandwich, and you think, oh, you're already trapped. So one of the beautiful things was, and I said this to Elisa, it's so nice to see a bakery with the prices up. And she had gone to a lot of effort because there were 100 cakes.
He's all right. Can I hear him?
There were 100 cakes there, and every single one of them she'd gone to the trouble of pricing. And she was constantly apologizing to me for not having a big enough selection of cakes, and she was down on her stock. But this place was really busy. You know those bakeries you sometimes see on the TV where they're sort of famous, like the Cake Boss Bakery, where people are sort of always in there buying stuff. Well, it was like that. It was, you had to take a number when you went in. This is the Torridon Bakery in Victoria, by the way, anyone that's just joined me. You took a number when you went in because there were so many people in there. You couldn't, fair enough. I mean, nobody wants to sort of stand and not get served in order. So she apologized for that. And I said, no, that's fine. You know, if you've got a lot of customers, it's a number system's a good thing to have. But she was saying, Elisa, bless her, she was saying, oh, you're filming in here and it's kind of, I haven't got, it's not everything's up together. I thought, Alicia, if this isn't up together, I hate to think what up together is, because she had an amazing selection.
She had about 6 or 7 counters full and full. They weren't just sparsely full.
No, they were full. And one thing that I know this is really simple, but you know the old-fashioned little jam tarts we had as kids? She had a selection of those, and she had lemon. I like lemon a lot, so she had some lemon jam tarts. And so we did say to the lad in the ice cream shop, we'll pop in and get ourselves a slice. Well, we came out with 6 or 7 cakes. We had cookies. We had a beautiful eclair, a little bit like the cream puff that I made for the American food. Google slime. I wonder if that's the young girl that that we met yesterday.
Paul says hi as well, and Stephen Harrison says,
hey Stephen,
hi.
Hey Paul.
Because Stephen says, as a student, you care a lot about money. 60p Morrison's Pizza it is.
Yeah, I know, but I tell you, one of my pet peeves is to go into a bakery or a cafe where they just do not price their food, and I don't know what it is in Australia particularly. I find that they are too lazy. Sometimes they, only have maybe 8 different cakes or 5 different cakes, and they just don't bother to put the prices up. And here's Elisa. She's got a bakery there. She's got 100 cakes, and I don't mean just cakes, because she had dozens of different pies, big pies, small pies, and there was a young girl in the bakery. She actually had a meat pie. Aussies are famous for our meat pies, and she was a young girl. She's probably about late teens, early 20s, and she said, "Oh, one of the best meat pies in Australia," and it looked like a really good pie. Unfortunately, we just had been to the fish and chip shop. We were going to the ice cream store. We'd already bought a big stack of cakes from this place. I wasn't going to have a meat pie as well, although I kind of regret not trying a meat pie, so maybe next time we go down we'll do.
So Paul says it's seen this exact same thing here in Ireland, so he thinks it's the same everywhere.
Not pricing stuff. Well, I tell you what, shops that don't price their cafes that don't price their cakes and things that are on the side, you shouldn't frequent them. I would say if it's that much effort to take a little bit of card and write the price of something on there, then find yourself a different business to get into. And I know that's maybe a little bit harsh, but I see no excuse. I see no excuse for not putting your prices up. There are some places in the world where it's illegal not to put your prices up. It should be here in Australia, and I know that's a bit petty, but it's just silly. It's a pointless thing if you have to. If you go into, there's a place I used to like near us in Glen Waverley, and you'd go in and they had a whole load of lovely Greek cakes and things, but some of them were really expensive. I'm talking sort of, you'd get 2 and it'd be $15 for a little sort of baklava or something like that, because they had expensive ingredients. And some of them were super cheap, but you wouldn't know. You couldn't know because they didn't put the prices up. So you could go and say and order, I'll have one of those and one of those and a cup of coffee, and you'd walk out with a $30 bill. Or you could go, I'll have one of those and one of those and a cup of coffee, and walk out with a $9 bill. Or you've got to stand there all the time saying, oh, how much is that cake? How much is this cake? How much is that biscuit? Frustrating. So Elisa, the Turin Bakery, really not only one of the best bakeries that I've been in for a long time, but also good on you for taking the effort to put the prices and description of every single cake.
So Byron says, take my advice, be very selective about what desserts you can get at the local bakeries.
Well, I was very selective, Byron. I selected everything.
And Cynthia says 50-50 here, some do, some don't, being pretentious. And then Paul says, I think some don't commit to prices because if they have a quiet business day, they can change to suit themselves.
Well, isn't that the thing? Actually, that's one of the frustrations. Who said that?
Paul.
It is one of the frustrations, Paul, because you do feel that they can make up the prices on the spot, particularly the smaller cafes where they're sort of not run by, maybe they're not staffed, but they're staffed by families and things like that. You do get a feeling, particularly in tourist areas, that they'll just make up the prices. Hello, Israel. I'm sorry I can't read your name there, but
Stephen Harrison says German bakeries are the best. It's interesting that in Germany, for the same type of bread, it has different names in all the regions.
Yes.
It's a bit like in France with their baguettes.
The French baguettes are often named differently by region as well. But the German bakeries are some of the best. Actually, one of my favourite experiences when I go to Germany is to go to the bakeries. But I can tell you also, if you were a German here in Australia and you went to one of the Baker's Delights, these are the chain bakeries, Baker's Delights, and there's another one that escapes my memory, you would be very disappointed. I don't want to bag on Baker's Delight, but basically all the bread's the same. Brumbies. I think they're just, and Brumbies. I am going to bag on them a little bit. They mix up one basic bread mix and make everything from it. It seems like appalling. But if you were, sorry, what I was going to say, if you were German, you came here and you went to Touriden Bakery. It's a very simple spelling, Tooradin. But I have a hell of a time working out how to say it. You won't be disappointed. Anywhere in the world could go to that bakery, and I think they'd be pleased.
Yeah. Soap Lady 52 says, not harsh at all. If you can't bother to display the price, I can't bother to buy from you. It's my policy.
It's my policy too. I mean, unfortunately, it's so common here in Australia that it's hard. If you literally say I won't buy stuff that's not priced, you'd never be able to buy stuff. So when you see a place that does it, it really stands out. And I just think it's such a small effort. And sometimes these places are only, you know, they're not even baking their own caramel. You know, they've got a caramel slice, maybe a hedgehog, a lamington, and they've got them on a little plate. Just not having the prices there.
Quite often they charge the same price.
Oh, by the way, they sometimes then tell you it's up on the board, and you'll look on, see this board behind me, you'll look on the board, and there's just like a pile of writing on there. So you've got to read all the way down it and work out which is the cake that you've actually seen. And you're not even sure. There's a brown thing with some sort of sherbet on top of it. You don't know what they might call it. They might call it a sort of sherbet log. They might call it a cafe sundae, and you've got to work out what it is. So it's like guessing games as to how much the prices is. Grow up, cafe owners. Grow up and just spend the 30 seconds it takes to write a price on a small little piece of card and pop it in front. You don't even have to have a little stand for it. You can just get a card and put it a little A fold and stand it in front of your cake. It isn't hard. So and I do tell them, actually, I say, why don't you have your prices up? But I did it for the first few years I was in Australia, and then I just got bored of it because nobody did. So it's my moaning done.
Well, Byron says, what do you think of Japanese bakeries, should I say?
I like Japanese bakeries. I mean, they all have their place. The Japanese and Chinese, Korean bakeries. I really like them. And sometimes I really fancy some Japanese bakery goods, because they do tend to do a lot more sweeter flavored things than we have. I mean, a traditional Aussie bakery will do the sweet stuff, but also will do nice, just, you know, a cob loaf or a nice baguette or something like that. And quite often in a Japanese bakery, even the sandwich bread can be quite sweet, you know. So it can be, it's horses for courses. They do make some fantastic and very beautiful cakes with the matcha, and the cocoa flavored things are really good, and some of the savory mixtures that they do are really good too. I think they're good, Byron, in all honesty. And sometimes, you know, I go to a Chinese bakery and I just fancy those sausage buns they make, because we used to have them so much when we lived in Asia. They're just basically a slightly sweet, soft bun with a hot dog sausage in the middle. So just like a Frankfurter sausage through the center. And I really like those. I don't know why, but just occasionally you'll go to a store and you'll say, oh, I fancy one of those, and they make them really badly. But just occasionally. Most Asian bakers or Chinese bakers do those pretty good. I don't think I'm going to be able to eat this. I might try a little bit later on with you guys too. This is what took me about this lemon tart is its simplicity, because they actually also had the proper, I can't even begin to describe how many cakes the Touriden bakery had. They had the traditional lemon tarts, but I really was kind of taken. They had the red ones as well. So these are just the very simple tarts that we used to have as kids. I think they were only about $1.20 each.
Yeah.
So not for Australian standards, that's quite reasonable.
So Stephen Harrison says bread roll in North Germany is called Brochen. And in South Germany,
Zehnmal Brochen, bitte.
It is called Semmeln.
Well, I know that Brochen. Well, I'm struggling with something I've known all my life. Zehnmal Brochen. We used to go as kids, and we would go to the local bakery, and you'd always buy your bread rolls in groups of 10 or 5. Rarely would you go in and buy 2 bread rolls. So we always used to go and get a big paper bag full of bread rolls every morning. The German bread rolls, there's something special about them. There's something very special about German bread.
So Charmin Actors says, smiles, hello. Charlotte says hi.
Hey Charmin. Hey Sharon, Charlotte. How are you?
And the Rubik says, hi Steve, I've watched a lot of videos for making pancakes, even yours I think, but at the end, all of them are flat. Do you know how I can make them spongy?
Yeah, it's not difficult. My English style pancakes are similar to a crepe, a French crepe. French crepes are generally thinner and they tend to fold them into a quarter. The English style pancakes are a little bit thicker. They have more egg in. They're not thick though like an American pancake, and you tend to roll them up and put your sugar and lemon in. If you want the little sort of puffy ones, really all you've got to do is use self-raising flour or add baking soda. If you're going to make them straight away, you can actually put about a teaspoon of baking soda in with your batter mix and pour them, and you get lovely big fluffy pancakes. If you're going to make the batter and keep it in the fridge, I suggest you use baking powder, because that actually only activates when it's been heated. And if you use baking soda and you keep it in the fridge, sometimes the baking soda will just dissipate and die, because the baking soda will carbonate when it meets fats. So if it's in with the milk, it will start to carbonate straight away. Whereas baking powder has some other additives in it that stops it activating when it comes into contact with fats or liquid, and it really only sort of activates and releases carbon on heat. So generally you're going to make your pancake batters straight away, and you're going to make them within the first sort of 40 minutes to an hour, and that way you just use self-raising flour or baking soda, or bicarbonate of soda if you can't find baking soda.
So James Ryan says, hey buddy.
Hey James. So that's really the only difference between that American fluffy style pancake or Japanese fluffy pancake, or any other fluffy pancake, to be honest, is the type of leavening agent used in it. And the difference between what I traditionally would call an English tossing pancake and a French crepe is that the English tossing pancakes are a little bit thicker, usually more egg, and we tend to roll them and toss them in a pan, whereas the crepes tend to be made on a flat griddle, and you use a wooden griddle tool just to sort of I forget the name of the tool, and you just tend to then flatten the pancake, sort of spoon it round with this flat trowel, and that makes a very thin crepe. So some people come on to my video about the English pancakes and say, that's a crepe. It's not a crepe. It's not a crepe. It's an English pancake, and they go back many centuries. So, you know, it's not as if the French copied the crepe, or the Americans copied the English pancake, or anyone else, because the American pancake probably comes more from the style of the Dutch pancake, I think, or German pancake.
So the Rubik says, thank you. And that's greetings from Mexico. That was who asked
hola,
about the pancakes.
thank you.
And Stephen Harrison said, just found out there were 12 different names for bread roll in Germany. Didn't think it would be that much.
Well, there are different styles of bread rolls as well. The standard Brochen is just the round bread roll, and but there are many different variants, as there are in our culture as well. We have many different types of bread roll. We have a cottage bread roll, which used to be one of my favorites, which is a standard white bread roll, made up. It's a fairly large, and then on top it has a much smaller bread roll, or a little knot on top. When you bake those, we would call those a cottage roll.
He's saying 12 different for the classic white bread roll. I think it's actually...
Yeah, probably regional dialects. I mean, all over Germany, you have, when you're in the south, you certainly speak quite, most of my German that I understand and speak is from sort of central, more central Germany, but when I go down to the south, even the greetings are slightly different.
So Charlotte says, I'm doing well, lemon tart looks good, I've been craving sweets. Yeah,
don't we always... Sharon, don't we always crave sweets? I'm looking at this now and seeing that Oreo cookie in the middle of this cookie. It's a bit odd, isn't it? A cookie inside a cookie. So this is from the Sourdough Bakery. Now, there at some point during this, I've got to address the sourdough. So I might do that now if it's not too long into the show. So Michelle, could you just read out the earlier question?
It says... from Heather, it says, if a recipe calls for yeast, but I want to use my sourdough starter, how do I know how much starter to use instead of processed yeast?
And that's
from Heather.
Heather. So the question is if you've got your sourdough starter and you want to, say, make a recipe that's in a book that asks for yeast. Now I'm going to answer this, and hopefully I get it right in my head. I said it to Michelle many times before when we've been talking about sourdough starters, so it should be fairly clear. Every bread recipe has what we call a hydration level. So maybe a French baguette has a 60% hydration. Forgive me if I'm incorrect on my figures. A normal white loaf might have a 70% hydration. Some very wet loaves, maybe a focaccia or something like that, could be as maybe 55. Hi Gil or Jill percent. So it's hydration levels. Now, if you bake regularly at home, you kind of get a feel for your doughs, and you might be able to work without weights and measures. But the reason I always say weights and measures are so important, because if you want to share a recipe for a pizza base or a French baguette, if you try using cup measurements and you compact them down and then you use cups of water, you're going to find that it'll get inaccurate. So that's the boring weights and measures out of the way. So if you say, for example, you have a loaf that says it wants 100 grams of... Now, this would be the same if it was 12 ounces of flour and 6 ounces of water. It's unlikely to ask for that in weights, because that would be a 50% hydration, yes? But say the loaf said, so you go where I'm going, it's 12, half is 6. So if it's 100 grams, half is 50. So if the recipe says you need 100 grams of flour, for example, and 100 grams of water in it, and then a teaspoon of yeast, it's going to be a pretty wet flour. You are talking about a 100% hydration. So there's 100% water to flour. Just get rid of Lewis McKenna. Lewis, grow up, get yourself back to school. So you've got 100% hydration. Now, if you make a sourdough starter and you make a sourdough starter, you have got a 100% hydration, because we're actually using, although we're using we're mixing a cup of flour with half a cup of water, the grammage is the same. So a cup of flour, say, is 100 grams, 125 grams, I'm not exactly sure what it was, but and a cup of water, you're mixing the same by weight. So can you just lock them? Yeah. Lewis, I know you'll still be watching, but just a little point, right? With my channel,
it's Louise.
It's Louise, is it? My channel, we've got really good people here, okay, really nice, good people. And there are channels that really enjoy the sort of banter of idiots. Just pop across and play with those channels, not with mine. This is the first time I've ever had such a thing, so I'm probably not used to it. We keep a starter named George and we feed it. Let me just get through this, Raggy. Good to see you in, mate. So if you get a bread recipe that's asking for 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water and a teaspoon of yeast, if you want to change that to convert that to a sourdough starter, you have to remember that your sourdough is 50% water, 50% flour. So we don't need a lot of sourdough starter to actually activate the yeast in the bread. So let's say if we take 50 grams of, I'm going to be frustrated today because there's a dog barking in the background. Very hard to do. I should have written this down. So if you take 50 grams, guys, I might be the consummate professional, but when idiots like Lois McKenna come in and then we suddenly get a dog barking in the background, I lose my patience a little bit. So if you take 100, if it says 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour, you've got to reduce the flour content. Say if we take then 50 grams of the flour out, I'll do it on 200, it'll make it simpler. So 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of water. That's going to be too wet. 200 grams of flour, 100 grams of water. All right? That's a drier, that's a 50% hydration. A little bit dry, your bread won't be ideal, but it'll make things simple. You'd have to work this out on paper. Now, if you take out 50 grams of your, I'm going to get Michelle to see if she can. We've had dogs barking all day in this neighborhood. You know, there's a funny thing in this where we are at the moment. We're living in we're staying in a little area. Every single house around us, bar none, has dogs. So one dog barks, the next dog barks, the next dog barks. And so all day long, it's just peppered with dogs barking. And it can get quite frustrating because you sometimes just want a little bit of peace and quiet. So yes, life on the road, it's not always as yeah, real life happening, Gil. It is to the point that there's a dog next door that was barking today. And so what happened is the mother of the house next door to it came with her daughter and stood looking in at the dog. And the dog was going crazy and they were just sort of staring over. I could see them from where I was. They were just staring over at the dog. Now, the dog was really spooked by them just staring into their garden. But they sat staring at the dog, even though it was barking, for nearly 20 minutes. And not only did the mother then go away, the father came back and they were all just staring in at the dog and it was just going back. And they were laughing and waving and sort of, and I thought, you're distressing the dog. Clear off and leave the poor thing. You're not doing your...
Oh, sorry, I'm just reading down.
So in simple terms, you've got to, when you're doing converting, you've got to create your hydration levels the same. So if we took 50 grams of the flour out, we would then have to put back the flour by weight of our sourdough. Now remember, if you take 50 grams of flour out and you put 50 grams of sourdough starter in, you're not actually putting 50 grams of sourdough starter, you're putting 25 grams of flour and 25 grams of water, because 50 grams of sourdough starter is half and half water and flour. So if you take 50 grams of flour out of that recipe, you have to then put in 100 grams to replace the flour quantity. So if you put 100 grams of flour into your bread recipe, you then have to take out 50 grams of the water you should have added. Does that make sense? To me, I kind of have quite a mathematical mind, so it's sort of really clear, but I sometimes not always perfect, particularly when I get a little bit flustered. So if we had a 200 grams, it asks for 200 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. We take out 50 grams and we put in 100 grams of flour of our starter. All right. Now we've balanced up the amount of flour. We've still got 200 grams of flour in there, but we've also added an extra 50 grams of water because the sourdough starter has 50 grams of water in it. So when it asks for 100 grams of water, we now only add 100 grams of water plus our sourdough starter. So you reduce the ratios. It's not really that difficult to do, and you can do it with much smaller amounts. If you're doing a long proof and you say if you have a 200 grams of flour and 100 grams of water and you're doing a long proof like an overnight proof, you might only want to put 25 grams of your your sourdough starter in. So you've got to do the math then, because 25 grams, half of 25 grams is 12.5 grams. So if you'd have to take 12.5 grams off the flour and 12.5 grams off the water. So you end up with the same hydration level. You will then, over time, you'll get to understand, if you're going to do a slower fermentation, you might want more sourdough starter. So you can work that out. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you can change the flavor and the structure of a sourdough loaf by how much of the starter you put in as well, because the flour that's in a sourdough starter has complex flavors. It has those sort of like those sourdough flavors. So if you said took 100 grams of the flour out and went with a whole 100 grams of your sourdough starter, you'd actually be only putting in 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. So you'd actually need to put 200 grams of your flour, your starter in, and you'd be getting rid of the water altogether. You wouldn't add any water in, because if you would, because the actual you're not likely to have a 50% hydration loaf that often. So I hope that answers that question. Now you might have to listen to that over 2 or 3 times, and I'm sorry about the interruptions.
Well, Gil 2727 says, I haven't attempted a sourdough starter yet. Good info here. Well,
they're great breads to make, and actually, those of you that have been following the channel for a while remember when I was in Sicilia.
Which Cynthia has just said, I know you did a video on drying out some sourdough starter. Could I use a food dehydrator to dry it out?
Oh, right. Funny you should say that, Cynthia, because here is our Sicilian sourdough starter. Now, you remember when I was in Sicily, I made a beautiful sourdough starter. It was making really nice loaves. So what I did is I actually spread that flour dough, that starter, out onto some parchment paper, baking paper, I think we did it on, was it?
Yes.
And you could do it on a silpat mat, you could do it on a tabletop, anything you like really. And it dried like it just dried in the warmth of the, the Italian winter. It dried out like and broke up like cornflakes. And then I broke it up into sort of almost like a meal. And if you smell that, this is nearly a year, over a year.
2 years.
2 years. Oh, we've been carrying this with us for ages because I just haven't had the opportunity to rehydrate it and use it again. But even now, that smells just like an Italian flour bread, like the bread that we used to buy in the local bakers. So yes, you could dry it in a dehydrator, Cynthia, but you probably best not. The danger is if you do it in a dehydrator, if it's got a temperature, a heat temperature on there, there's a chance you might kill some of the yeast. Because don't forget, sourdough is a living organism. It is actually a natural yeast that's in the environment. When you dry it naturally just out like that, you put it in a hibernation state. And I'm hoping that this will still be perfectly good. I'm pretty sure it will be. Yeast will last for many years in a dormant state. So I would be inclined not to do it in a dehydrator, because there are some of them have heating elements on them, some of them have uneven heating, and you may end up killing some of the yeast. It's that simple just to spread it out. It dries really quickly.
The thinner you make it, the quicker it'll
dry.
The
thinner you make it, the quicker it'll dry. It really dries. Imagine if you drop a little bit, of wet dough on the countertop, it dries within minutes. You know, you're scraping it off a few moments later. Or even if you mix wet dough with your hands and you keep your hands in the air for 5 minutes or so, it's all dry and crispy on your hands. So it doesn't take long in almost any environment, whether it's humid or not. It doesn't take long.
Just going back a little bit, Supergram 1000 said, seems like every country has their own version of pancakes. My favourites are still the English way with lemon and sugar. They were the first things I taught my daughters to cook.
I have to say my favourite still are the English style pancakes. I like all pancakes, but I just got a soft spot from when we were kids. Having, tossing the pancakes, it was always the big thing to sort of like get them in the pan and toss them up in the air and let them turn, and then, as you say, fresh lemon juice and just sugar. Crazy as it might sound, is still possibly my favourite pancake. Simple and delicious.
Casey Henry says, hello Steve, currently snowing in East Tennessee, hope all is well.
Just quickly, Cynthia, but I will just, can you repeat that in a minute, Michelle? Yeah. Just for Cynthia's, don't worry about it being wet, Cynthia, or even humid. You'd be surprised. If you want, just test it a little bit. Just take a few tablespoons out, spread it out on a silpat or a piece of baking paper. I guarantee you, even if it's howling with wind or it's humid and sunny, that'll still dry out.
So it was Casey Henry said, hello Steve, currently snowing in East Tennessee, hope all is well.
Good, East Tennessee. Who was that, Casey?
Casey Henry.
Hey Casey.
And Ismat Sahara said, hi, hey mate, how are you doing?
Hey Ismat, how are you?
And Ian Waltman said, what's your favourite holiday dessert? That's possibly too big a question for me to answer. Right now, I'm on holiday, and it'll be these Oreo chip cookies. I think your favourite Christmas holiday dessert's easy.
Is it?
Isn't it Christmas pudding?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Well, I got a few. I mean, I like Christmas. Michelle's right. I do love Christmas pudding, but I also love really good mince pies. And there's a whole... let's just talk about Christmas recipes. Hang on, I wanted to quickly address Susan's question, because it is to do with the sourdough starter, and that's what the show's about. Mm-hmm. Bacteria in a sourdough starter is not uncommon. You'll often see sometimes a little bit of bacteria, a little bit of alien fungus growing on top. And actually, generally, if it's a little sort of murky and grey, you can just scrape it off. It's not going to be a big problem. If it still smells, if your sourdough still smells funky, as a sourdough should, a little bit vinegary, a little bit sour, and there's a little bit of bacteria on the top, like maybe a little bit of mold on top, don't worry about it. You can scrape that gently off the top and discard it, but you're generally getting bacteria from contamination. So it's another thing. Be careful that your flour supply is good. Be careful of the tools you use. So do sterilize the the implements you use, knives, forks, spoons. You know, the more you sterilize things, the less chance you're going to get a foreign bacteria in there. But there are also a lot of bacteria that find it very hard to survive in a rich sourdough environment. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. Keep contaminants out. Don't worry if it still smells good. It still smells like a sourdough. If it starts to smell really funky, like really almost unsmellable, trust your nose. You can't recover a bad sourdough if it's gone really bad. And I know practice and time will tell you actually whether or not a sourdough starter is good or not.
And he says, I think I killed off most of the yeast in a couple of weeks ago. I got a bread at last, but it took 24 hours to rise. The water was obviously too hot. First time that has happened. So it probably took a long time to rise because most of the yeast had been killed off if the water was too hot.
Yeah, if the water was too hot, you could have actually damaged your starter. You know, you could have killed a lot of the yeast in there, and what survived still came back. So you can actually, even with hot water, still kind of produce a decent loaf, but it'll need a lot longer to fermentate, because basically if you've got a football field of little yeasts and you throw them into your loaf, but just before you put them in you kill half of them, they've got to rebuild themselves. You know, they've got to rebuild the colony, so to speak. So if you put them in there and they're all healthy, they'll grow. But you can start. I've done sourdough loaves with a quarter of a teaspoon of starter, and if you let the fermentation process take its toll, those yeast will literally gorge through the carbohydrates that are in your flour, and it'll still work.
So moving on, 04 says, hello, long time no see.
Oh, long time no see. How are you? Now, I'm going to have a quick bite. I've been thinking I want a bite of my cookie.
So Susan says, thank you very much. I recently decided to throw out a new starter because I thought it just didn't smell right. Sort of like nail polish remover. That's the smell you don't want to have, isn't it?
When it starts to stink a little bit like chemical, chances are you may have destroyed it. Gil, it's a white chocolate melt, I think. I don't want to bite into it because look, oh, I suppose there's cookies all the way through. Yum. So that's a interesting way to do a cookie, eh?
It's a cookie inside a cookie. So
this is from the Sourdough Bakery, which I've been praising all through this show. If you're in Australia, anywhere near Melbourne at all, Sourdough, best bakery I've been to for a long time. She's used small, I think probably mini or broken Oreo cookies, and she's put it inside a cookie, and then she's put a white chocolate melt on top.
Yep, so the Rubik says, I want that cookie. And Cindy Roman said, just wanted to say your pumpernickel bread recipe is my go-to. Very delicious and easy with the guidance provided.
Who was that?
That was Cindy Roman.
Excuse me, Cindy.
While you're finishing, Gil also says that cookie looks awesome. Haven't had dinner yet.
Oh, here, a little plug. I've got the Steve's Kitchen t-shirts. They're in the shop, I think, underneath my YouTube videos. Possibly on steveskitchen.com, I'm not sure.
Yeah, on steveskitchen.com.
Yeah. They're quite nice quality, actually. I quite like them. Share the love, Steve's Kitchen. So, Cindy, was it?
Yeah, Cindy, talking about the pumpernickel.
Cindy, that pumpernickel recipe, I actually got that when I was living in Germany many years ago, and a lot of people criticize, oh, it's not a true pumpernickel. A traditional pumpernickel is a little bit like a sourdough starter. You kind of make it over a period of 2 or 3 days. I mean, it takes a long time to get that real traditional pumpernickel. But that recipe, to me, the one that is on my channel, it makes a very good quick pumpernickel, and the flavors are so lovely. I mean, I just think that's a gorgeous bread, and you can slice it when it's baked, as you know anyway, you've made it. When it's baked, you can slice it really thin, just like a pumpernickel should be. You can put a little bit of cream cheese on there. You can put some, you know, capers, roll mops, anything onto that sort of bread, and it is so good. So yes, that pumpernickel. Maybe make a note to share the pumpernickel recipe at the bottom of the video later on.
Okay. So moving on, 04 said, my yeast died overnight on Thanksgiving. First time ever happened to me. Not sure the cause. Was rising nicely when we bedded down. Next morning was a flat mess.
Well, that's probably recoverable. If your yeast, if your sourdough sort of like collapses, there's a possibility that it's just got too cold. We're going to be discussing that in a minute with the next question, a little bit about what can cause a sourdough starter to die. But it generally, as long as it still smells okay, and you've been using the right quantities, you know, 50% water to 100% water to 100% flour, you probably can recover that quite easily. I would discard 50% of it and just start afresh, and it'll come back, because any of the little yeasts that have survived in there are still going to, you can still sort of cajole those back into life.
So Gil said, thanks for the heads up on that recipe, Cindy. Love pumpernickel used in place of rye bread, which I think is icky.
Yeah, pumpernickel is another. We talked about the German Brötchen, but the pumpernickel also, and a lot of the rye breads that you can get in Germany are just so delicious.
So the Kitchen Library says, hi Steve, Natasha here, all the way in the Caribbean, just tuned in.
Hey Natasha, good to have you in.
And
now,
Raven North says, hey there.
Hey buddy, how are you?
Sean.
Sean. Now, we have another question on the sourdough starters that I thought was quite interesting, and it needs to be addressed. So can you just read that one, Michelle, so I'll refresh my memory on it?
It's quite a long one. It says, hello Steve, thank you for sharing your tips on the sourdough starter. I made the starter and I left it for 48 hours as you instructed. It bloomed beautifully. When I started to feed it, first feed, next day, it did not bloom as much as the 48 hours. I'm wondering why, as the flour mixture is the same, bread flour and whole wheat when I made the starter. Do I leave it alone and not feed it and see how it goes? I did place it on top of the refrigerator when I first started. Humidity or heat should not be an issue here in the tropical Singapore. It's my second time doing the starter, and the pattern of after the 48 hours, the starter blooms beautifully, and upon first feed, bubbles are not active or inactive.
So they're constantly getting the same.
Yeah,
problem.
Following exactly the feeding instructions given.
Okay, what was the name?
That was Yappy772.
So Yappy's having problems. They're starting off. Now I'm presuming, Yappy, you're using my recipe. I'm hoping you are, because the amounts that I talk about are quite important. So I would suggest, firstly, hopefully you're starting off with the recipe. It's not really a recipe, it's a simple scientific sort of experiment, but I hope you're using the quantities that I said and the method that I said. Quite often, if you are mixing your cup of flour, half a cup of water together, or 50-50, because water is heavier than flour, you mix them together, you pop them on the side, and the next day they're bubbling nicely. You've got sort of like an early start, because quite often the next day they're not starting, but they're starting nicely. That's a good sign. It means that it's active. So you take that and you add in you maybe discard a little bit. I probably wouldn't discard a little bit if it was going nicely on the first day. You feed that again with your 50% water and your 50% flour. Give it a mix through, and you find it seems to slow down. There's a number of possibilities. You mentioned you were in Singapore, so it shouldn't be a problem with the temperatures, but actually there are two things. You could be a little bit too hot. I mean, Singapore is Celsius, so I think if you're getting into those late 30s, sometimes those hotter temperatures can actually mean that the yeast is eating through the flour almost too quickly, and it needs more feeding. So that can be an issue. I have seen that before. So do try and find a place where you said you had it on top of the fridge on the first night, but did you move it on the second night. I don't know. I'm going to assume that you continue to keep it on the fridge. Maybe put it into a cupboard, like where you might keep your plates or cereal somewhere, and that's just the ambient temperature is a little bit cooler. That certainly could help. But also, if your temperatures are quite high, you might want to.
So moving on, it's just off to finish dinner up. Hope you both have a wonderful holiday season and are greatly blessed.
Yes, Gloria, you have a lovely time too. Enjoy. So that, as I was saying, where was I?
You're saying about it being too hot, but also the air conditioning, you could maybe make it too cold.
You could have air conditioning in Singapore. That could be making. So I would say find a nice stable temperature, probably in a larder or a cupboard where you might keep your cans. If you've got a nice larder, try that. Another thing though, that I'd be suspicious of is what water are you using? Are you using water from the tap? There's little factors like if you say, I know the water in Singapore and many cities is chlorinated, possibly even fluoride or chlorinated, and that can have a diverse effect on your starters. Now you might find that when you, the way you counteract that is either used bottled water that has no chlorine or fluorine in it, and you need to make sure that's the case. But also you can take tap water and put it into a jug or a jar and put it in sunlight, and the chlorine will break down. So you could leave it out for a number of hours. You'll find the reason swimming pools constantly need chlorine added to them is because sunlight breaks down the chlorine. So it's the same if you take a cup of water and from the tap that's heavily fluorinated or chlorinated, and you leave it on the side. The following day there'll be no chlorine in there. So it's possible that if you're taking it straight from the tap and putting it in, if the chlorine levels are a little high, you might be having an adverse effect. So I'd certainly consider decanting your tap water. Was something I've often done is decant it off into a jug if you're doing with a sourdough starter, so that after 24 hours there's no real chlorine in there, particularly if you leave that in sunlight. And then you use that water, or go and get some regular distilled water, you know, the bottled water the supermarkets sell, or even a nice mineral water that's got no added chlorine in it. Generally though, bottled water doesn't have chlorine, isn't chlorinated, because unless it's got a dark thing, the chlorine will break down, so it's almost pointless.
So Susan says, can the room be too cool to get a new starter going? Yeah,
it can be too cool. That's the other thing. Not in Singapore, that's probably not likely to be the case unless they have the air conditioning up really high. But yes, it can be. I mean, your yeasts that are active in a sourdough starter are the yeasts that we will find on our body, on our skin, on our hands, in the air, just generally all around us. And those yeasts will go very dormant in the colder weather, and can sometimes get too active and almost sort of like run out of food in extremely hot weather, to a point where it gets too hot and they die. So yes, what was the question? It can be too cool.
Too cool, yes.
So certainly make sure your starter is at what we would say room temperature. I think, you know, once you get anywhere up to sort of maybe 80 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm not sure what the lower end scale is. I'm not great with my Fahrenheit anymore, but in your Celsius, you'd be probably looking anywhere between sort of like 18 and 28 degrees Celsius is a good ballpark figure, but I'm guessing from temperatures that I feel comfortable in.
So Scarlet Pancake says, how can I make black treacle? I watched your video and I still have trouble. Any suggestions?
You still have trouble? You've tried to make it?
Yeah. Well, how can I make black treacle? I watched your video and I still had trouble. Any suggestions? Depends what trouble.
It depends what trouble you've had. I mean, if you follow the instructions on my video, you should end up with a decent black treacle. But if you've followed that and you've had problems, maybe let me know what you mean.
Fabson Draw says, have you ever tried fruits from Singapore, Malaysia?
Yes, we spent a lot of time in Malaysia, in Penang, in Malacca, and Singapore over the last few years, and we've got a nice video out there if you want to check it out on the durian farm that we went to. So we've tried all many different varieties of durian. I'll get Michelle to put the link. You can go and check it out. We went to a really cool durian farm in Malaysia, and the durians were really good. And I kind of never really liked durian. Durian. For those of you that have never had durian before, it's something you really should experience. It's a very, very unusual fruit from Asia. It's all over Asia. They're not just Southeast Asia.
So Scarlett says, when I made the treacle, everything got stuck to the pot and I could not get anything out. You've
overheated. Scarlett, you've overheated, and possibly you need to be looking at getting a thermometer, a cooking thermometer, something like the one I use, the pen thermometer, what's it called? Thermopen, or just a regular jelly thermometer. Once you get your, and I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but once you get your treacle, when you reheat that treacle up, if it's getting up to that sort of hard crack or even close to hard crack levels, which you'll see marked on a jam thermometer, sure, when it sets, it's going to be just like a hockey puck. You're not going to be able to get it out there. If you follow the instructions very carefully and your pan has got a decent thick base to it so the heat dissipates nicely, you really shouldn't have any trouble following the instructions that I have. But if you're having issues like it's overheating, now you can recover that, by the way. Because treacle, we virtually burnt the sugars anyway. We're not too worried about overcooking the sugars. So you could possibly recover that by heating it up, adding some boiling water in, or adding some boiling water in and then heating up. Don't put cold water into a sugar syrup. It'll fizz and possibly even scald or burn you. You could actually add some water back into that and start to heat it up. And I'm talking maybe a half a cup of water, and start to heat that up. The only problem is you've kind of you probably would have to add some more sugar in there as well, because the sugar crystals have changed their structure. But I would probably add, here's what I'm going to suggest: cup of water, cup of sugar, heat it back up, but get a thermometer and make sure it gets the temperature that I stated in the video or in the description below. Don't get it up to hard crack. You're making toffee.
So Gil says, I think I'd only eat durian fruit on a dare.
Durian fruit's not bad. I actually had a friend of mine in Malaysia said to me, when you eat, because I'd never really enjoyed durian fruit, and they said to me, don't think of it as a fruit, think of it as a cheese. So if you like a really good, a sweating camembert, a camembert that's got nice and runny, or brie, or a good, when it's getting that sort of ammonic flavors, think that, and then it makes the durian easier to eat. If you're expecting sort of like sweet strawberries or mangoes, you're going to be very disappointed and also a little bit shocked, because you go to put it in your mouth and you're getting a more sort of custardy mixtures of that sort of ammonia and things that go into your mouth. So
Annie says, what happens to the starter if it is too cold part of the day? Will it go bad? I have the problem to be at the off-grid cabin during winter.
No, it won't go bad, but it will, because you can keep your starter in the fridge. It will just retard the starter. I mean, think of starters as tiny little soldiers that are sort of like, well, no, that's not very good, but they're cells that keep multiplying. So if you put them into a very cold scenario, they just stop producing and stop repeating.
Just looking over the fence at it again.
So this is what I was saying before. There's a couple just over the road here, and they're just staring at a dog that's in the fence and giggling and laughing as if it's normal. And they're a young couple. They're probably only about sort of in their late 20s with a young daughter. But some people...
So Raven North said, what happened to the chat about the channel content? Maybe I missed it at the start of this video. So I think that was yesterday's video that we were talking about what we're going to be doing over Christmas. Yesterday's video didn't work very well.
No, yes, I had problems with yesterday's video. I didn't like... I had a few small technical glitches and we messed up some things, so I didn't put it up. I took it back down. It was only a very short video. And what I wanted to say about this Christmas, we're doing a lot of traveling at the moment, and we're going to be sharing a lot more travel videos with you. But I've got a whole backlog of Christmas, really, I think, fantastic seasonal Christmas foods that were done some years back they've kind of gone out of date on YouTube because of the old annotations, and also some of the way I used to film is different. So I'm remastering them. I'm redoing some of those videos, some of the really good ones that I think a lot of you may not have seen, and I'm going to start putting up Christmas recipes through December, but they will be repeat recipes that I've done in the past. But I can tell you, they're really fantastic. I mean, there's some really great recipes, and I'm not just re-uploading the videos. I'm actually going to be picking the best ones, and I'm going to be re-editing and remastering them. Because the problem is, as you know, YouTube keep changing the way they work. Some of the videos from 2 or 3 years back, they've got like annotations and things. Or go and check this video out here and check that video. Well, and YouTube stopped using the annotations about 18 months ago, so they don't work. So I've got some really nice there are 1 or 2 real gems that just were put out at odd times. Like there were a few Christmas recipes I put up in the beginning of January for some reason, and it lost all the momentum. I don't ask me why. I can't even remember why, but there were a few recipes that we obviously didn't get done in time for Christmas. And so we put them up on the sort of 27th of December or something, and they end up with like about 500 views, and they're really great recipes. So I'm redoing those, remastering them, re-editing them a little bit, and going to put them up.
So Cynthia says, I love your Christmas videos. And the Kitchen Library says, excellent idea, your Christmas videos are awesome.
Yeah, these are the best. I think that what we're going to be putting up all throughout December are the very best of the Steve's Kitchen Christmas recipes. So you'll see some of the fun, some of the things that are passionate to me. I love Christmas. It's a fantastic time. I love the food around Christmas. We probably haven't a lot of time because we're sort of only spending 10 days here, 10 days there over the Christmas period to do a lot of new content. We'll see. We might get some stuff done.
Gil says it's got to be so weird to have Christmas in the summer. I'm from New England, US. It's just a cold association, I guess, with me.
Yeah, I think everybody, even in Australia, we feel it's a little bit odd having Christmas in the summer. You might have seen a photograph. If you're not following me on Facebook, get to Steve's Kitchen on Facebook and hit the like or follow button there. I put a photograph up of our Santa Claus, and he's basically a Santa Claus with a surfboard and his sort of t-shirt undone, or his robe undone. So we get a lot of that. There's a lot of as closer we get to Christmas, the weather's getting hotter and hotter. So by the time Christmas arrives, you've either got to get inside the house, whack the air conditioning up to its coldest point, and try and get a little bit of cool so that you can eat a roast dinner and all those heavy puddings and things. Or you've got to go the Aussie way and just go for lighter foods like the pavlovas and you know, the barbecues and things like that, which is what we tend to do. It's very hard to eat a really heavy sort of Thanksgiving style Christmas dinner in very hot climates.
So Fabsome Draws says, while you guys are traveling, which countries you guys going to visit, and have you ever eaten Korean foods?
I love the Korean foods I've had, and I can't think of, you know, apart from kimchi and things like that.
And the Korean barbecue and the cooking.
On the Korean barbecues we've been to. I love, you're probably never going to get me hear me saying I don't love any food, but Korean food. Korea is really high on the list of places that we would like to go. You might find it a little bit strange, but I really would love to go to North Korea as well. So
we've got a long list of countries we're going to maybe visit.
Look, you're going to see a lot more travel on the channel. I'd like to know right now if you are happy with that, so you can give me some feedback now. We are going to be doing a lot more travel content on the channel. We found in the past that as we've been traveling, we're trying to constantly do the standard cooking Steve's Kitchen food recipes, and what it's done, it's actually made us not able to quite enjoy some of the places we've been to, because I'm often in the kitchen, you know, in the chef jacket doing the cooking. And we thought next year, 2019, because we have so much travel planned, that we may well do a little less of the cooking and a little bit more of the food exploration and travel, and we'll try to share cooking when we can. So I hope you're all going to be happy with that. I know it's going to have a detrimental effect on the views, and I'm okay with that. I think we just have to accept that there are a lot of people who just want to see the cooking videos, and we'll have to just take you on the journey with us. For me, I got to get more relaxed about not feeling the pressure to create cooking videos, because we've had one or two stops where we've literally, I think Perth was a good example. Yeah. We were there for quite a few months, and instead of getting out and enjoying so much of Western Australia, I spent many days in the kitchen. You know, because even if you're just doing a video, you've got to buy all the content, you've got to buy, sometimes I've got to go and buy new appliances because I haven't got the stuff I need with me, and go out and do the cooking, and then it's the filming, and then it's the editing, so it gets really tiresome. I love doing it, but what ends up happening over a sort of period, if you do sort of 20 videos, times that by 2 days for each video, including filming and editing, that's a modest example, so that ends up being 40 days. That's 40 days that you're not out experiencing the travel.
So Start says, hello, are you guys doing any more IRL live streaming? I think that means in real life live streaming. So maybe like the cooking ones, I suppose, when you could, or maybe we will be going out and about.
We will be doing. Is it in real life? I'm not even sure quite what that means. You might want to clarify that. Lloyd says, can't believe it's 2019. Crikey, it really has come round.
And Gil says, right, I still start to write 1990s sometimes.
Yeah, oh, that you're getting a bit late for that. Yeah. I did that for a little while too, but now it's time you started putting at least the 2 at the beginning.
Yeah, I took IRL as meaning in real life. That's what Gil's saying. So I think they mean sort of rather than just sitting talking.
Yes, we're going to be doing a great deal more. And is that, were they saying live streaming?
Yes, it says, hello you guys, doing any more IRL live streaming?
Yeah, a great deal more.
Yes.
So a lot more location filming, a lot more getting out and about.
Raven North says, off topic, but do you have a video for refried beans? The stuff in the can is bland.
I've got to know, could you grab that one, Michelle? I don't know what brand this is, because the stuff in the cans is bland, but I got one the other day. Well, just check it first before you chuck me a spoon. I don't need this.
Yeah.
You happen to say this brand here, El Mexicano. So the can's a little bit mucky because it actually travelled with us sort of 20,000 miles around Australia. This is El Mexicano. It's frijoles negro frito, so it's refried beans. I only opened this. I've had it for a little while. I only opened it yesterday, even cold. This is nice refried beans. It's really good. Because you're right, I mean, generally refried beans are not that great when you buy them in the supermarket. So look for more authentic brands. No, I haven't managed to do a recipe. I do have a lot of notes about when we were in Mexico about how they make their refried beans. So I will try to do it, but don't be surprised if I have to go back to Mexico to have that experience.
So Sean says, come to Canada for a cold Christmas and we'll make a Christmas poutine together. That's Raven North.
Yeah, Christmas poutine.
Start, who was talking about the live streaming, says the shopping one's in public. So they were like when we went to the supermarket and things, I suppose. So yes, we will be doing lots more of looking at things. Kitchen Library says you can do travel vlogs showcasing the food of the country or region.
That's the plan. Shall I try this little lemon tart?
Yes.
I've had this for ages, but I love lemon tarts.
So Gil says, hey, I miss the 80s, lol. And Raven North says, I love the cooking, but I also really enjoyed the stream from Lang Lang where you highlighted some local foods.
Yes. Got a little bit of chocolate.
And Gil also says local food vids with getting their recipes would be epic.
So Mona's in as well.
Yes.
Hello, just saw you there.
You're going to be Mona. She says, hello, lovely duo. I agree with not eating hearty wintry fare down under, more barbecue, although love leftover Christmas steamed pud, crispy fried on the barbecue. My mum used to like Christmas pudding fried the next day, you know, just in a frying pan.
Yeah, Michelle's mum. We some people do actually almost like I always think of that, I don't know why, like it's black pudding.
Yeah.
But actually frying Christmas pudding. Now, Michelle wouldn't know because you're not a fan of Christmas pudding, are you? Well, you do like it.
No,
but...
I love Christmas puddings. Ashley doesn't like Christmas pudding.
All right.
Getting it wrong.
Oh dear.
So Lloyd Bonafide said that looks good.
I'm going for it.
And Raven North says, hope my fudge is safe. We did eat one. Still one left.
Still one left. Can you believe all the days I'm pretty good at not eating stuff, and I'm pretty good at eating stuff. That is a really nice lemon jam tart. It's really lemony, nice citrus, as I expected. Torridon Bakery, which is sort of south of Melbourne, going out towards the peninsula.
West, isn't it?
Yeah, Torridon. You can look it up if you're anywhere in Australia,
east,
close enough.
East.
Don't worry about it, Michelle.
I'm not very good.
People
at my
can
east and
Google
west.
it.
So Raven North says one thing I miss is minced meat pies for Christmas.
Who's that?
Raven North, Sean.
Sean, I've got loads of great recipes for your own mincemeat, and I will be putting up a remixed version. You can't do Christmas without mince pies. That's nice.
Is it good?
It's quite tart, which is nice.
Quite often lemon tarts aren't.
A tart.
A tart.
So, if there are any more questions, do we have any more that we need to address on the
I'll have a look.
sourdough starters?
Hit that thumbs up, because we've only
Hit
got
the thumbs up.
17.
So, so I'm reading the things.
Gil's off to cut up a whole beef tenderloin for dinner. We'll be watching on the TV monitor without chat. Have a great live chat, guys.
If you just come to learn about things sourdough, you might want to watch this through. I'm not going to make this video too long today, because if you've just come here to reference the sourdough, you might find it difficult to sort of filter through everything to find your answers, or should I care?
Well, Kitchen Library says, my Christmas fruit cake still comes out dry even after feeding it. What am I doing wrong? The taste is great though. Possibly overcooking it.
I would say overcooking. Yeah, I would say possibly cooking a little too long. So if you're using my recipe, you shouldn't really be overcooking it. If you're using another recipe, there's your problem.
Brenda wants you to do piccalilli.
I still haven't done piccalilli. You know, I keep working through the classics, the brown sauce, the HP brown sauce, the Branston pickle. There's a few others that I've done. I just haven't got round to doing piccalilli. Whenever I get stopped and somebody says to me, "Oh, will you do piccalilli?" I either can't get the ingredients, you know, for example, some of the hard fruit, hard vegetables that I need aren't available, or I can't get even a cauliflower or something like that, or we're in the throes of doing something else and I just can't get round to it. So we'll get there eventually. I'm not going to promise anything on piccalilli. I know I'm going to do it one day because I love piccalilli, and I've got a really good recipe. We always used to make it when we had the family at home all the time.
So the Kitchen Library says, I use your recipe. Could it be my baking pan?
It could be, but I would still say, depending on the height of and diameter of the pan that you're using. I mean, if it's a low, shallow pan, it might be the cooking too quickly. If you're getting good height on the cake and you're following my recipe, it should be okay. But you may have to just keep an eye on it. I
would check it a little bit before you normally check it.
Yeah, if it's the baking time, maybe about sort of 15-20 minutes earlier, get a skewer and pop it in.
Yeah, it's not going to harm just to do it quickly.
No, because by the time it's got its early baking stage, it's not going to drop.
And it's not like a sponge cake, it won't drop drastically. So Brenda says, I love your HP sauce recipe. It's a classic.
Yes, the HP sauce is great, and I think a lot of these things, like my baked beans that I made as well when I was in Sicily, a lot of these things are things that we love culturally from our background, that sometimes you're in a place, maybe you can't get peanut butter, so you have to make it yourself. Maybe you can't get a decent ketchup, so you have to make it yourself, or a brown sauce, or a Branston pickle. There are many times I've travelled in the world and I think, oh, I'd really like a bit of Branston pickle, and it's impossible to buy. I mean, you go to Puerto Escondido in Mexico, or San Miguel or Oaxaca, and say, oh, you know, I'd like a bottle of brown sauce, or I fancy some piccalilli, as you said. You won't get it, but you can make it. There's always a way to make those products. Generally, those are simple ingredients. Often they're just fruits and vegetables and sugars and vinegars, so you can make them. I think the first time we ever started making our own peanut butter, I can't remember which country we were living in at the time, but I think peanuts were really... Was it in France?
It was France. Peanuts were really
cheap. Like peanuts were, you could buy sort of sacks of peanuts for pennies, but peanut butter, because it's not common in the part of France we were in, you were paying sort of €5 for a tiny little tub of it. And I used to think, well, you know, I like, Michelle likes peanut butter, I like peanut, all my kids love peanut butter. We just make it, and when we started making it, probably wasn't the first time I made it, to be honest, but as soon as you make it, you think, wow, not only is that so easy to make, you know, this is so much nicer. Homemade peanut butter is so much nicer than some of the brands you get, because it is just pure peanuts. A little bit of peanut oil, or maybe sesame oil just to loosen it up sometimes, but generally it's just pure peanuts, and it tastes so good.
So Brenda asks, Steve, why does my homemade ketchup get clumpy?
Is it my homemade ketchup, Brenda? Are you using my recipe? I've got a feeling you're not, because I can't see how that could get clumpy.
And she says, Customs took my brown sauce because I forgot about the fluid once in my hand baggage.
Well, that'll happen.
They just wanted your brown sauce.
They did probably just want your brown sauce, and Customs becoming just a complete pain. It's nonsense that came about over the years with Customs has become tedious.
So Raven says, Steve, got an idea for you. How about a live stream where you visit a deli, grab some bread or buns, some meats, then share some sandwich ideas to enjoy while travelling? Simple but flavourful.
It will happen. We haven't got a deli near us at the moment, so it won't happen. That's why we were filming in Lang Lang, I thought it was just a lovely little village, and we'd film around it. Ravenoff, when we get somewhere and I really have that feeling this deli is really good, we will do it. And not just delis, it'll be other things. It'll be bread, it'll be German bread, it'll be
street food that they're
street
cooking.
food that's good.
So Brenda said probably used it on their bacon butties.
They probably did, Brenda. They probably saw you coming through and they thought, technically not a liquid, but brown sauce. Fancy some of that. And they stole your brown sauce. I always remember the first time we travelled, we flew to the US after 9/11, and I had a really nice set of sort of nail clippers that we had since we bought them in Hong Kong, I think, and they'd made all these new rules, you couldn't go on the plane with anything basically, and you knew they were just pilfering this stuff off you basically. Who's going to sort of like go and hijack a plane with a pair of nail clippers, fly to Rio, otherwise I'll clip your nails. It was, and they were just like a really nice high quality. You sometimes have a little, because we had the kids, you have to keep everyone's nails trimmed occasionally, and they would take them, oh, you can't have those in there, sir, and they'd pop them into the pile with all their other stuff, and as soon as you got around the corner they'd probably slip them in. And yes, I don't trust them.
RT Blade 4 says hello from Nashville, Tennessee. Don't have a question, just saying hello.
Oh, hello, RT Blade 4. So, fly me to Rio, otherwise I will file your nails.
And Charlotte says amen on the mincemeat pies. Agreeing with you that mincemeat pies are lovely.
Yes.
I think.
I'm going to remaster some of the mince pies that I've done and work out the best sort of thing and make a video. We're going to be doing lots of nice Christmas recipes, but you will see old familiar kitchens that I've been in the past, but they are going to be the best of Steve's kitchen. They're going to be updated somewhat, and also getting rid of the annotations that are in some of those videos that don't work anymore. I looked at one the other day and I thought, oh, that's a nice video, and then I'm sat there going, click here to check out part 1, or click here to go, and I'm thinking there's nothing, YouTube have taken it all away. And there's actually a notification now just last week I got a notification saying that all annotations were being deleted from YouTube. So any old annotations that you left on your system, they're just going to be deleted. Because at the moment, some of those annotations can still work unless you change, and it's complicated, but they're very silly.
So Mona said, could it be fan forced over baking the cake? Mum boiled her drive-through in ginger ale and spices, and her cake was moist. And she said, we'll look up your sources, Steve. Sounds great. Thank you for sharing.
Fan forced ovens can have a tendency. There are different sorts of ovens can make quite a difference. That's why I say check it a little bit earlier. Some fan ovens also ventilate. So if you feel a fan oven that's going, it's sort of blowing away, and it's like a hot air dryer on the front. You can feel that sort of air blowing out of it. They're not my favorite ovens, because basically what they're doing is they're pushing all the moisture out. And now that can be complicated if you want to put hot water in the bottom of an oven to get a good crust on a French loaf or something like that, and you put it on fan force, and it's just blowing the hot air out of the front of the oven. It's blowing a lot of the moisture out. So yes, if you have the option, try to cook without the fans on. So even with that cake, if you're baking it, try to cook without. Some fan ovens are actually sealed, so they actually just circulate an even amount of heat, and you can generally tell the better quality. And that doesn't mean Bosch, because actually Bosch makes some awful ovens nowadays. It's a bit like Mercedes used to make only good cars and now make all sorts of nonsense. Doesn't mean just because it's got Bosch or Miele on the front of the oven that it's any good anymore. Some ovens, some of the cheaper ovens, just blow the air around randomly, and you don't end up with it. The concept of a fan oven was always to take the heat at the bottom of the oven and the top of the oven and distribute it nice and evenly. And a good oven also is fairly sealed, so that the moisture isn't, so that the heat isn't escaping. If you've got one of those ovens that whenever you get near it, it's blowing, it burns you, you can imagine most of that hot air is escaping, and all the moisture is escaping. Sorry.
So Brenda says, haha, my mum used sherry or beer to plump her fruits.
Yeah, I mean, sherry, beer. I tend to use brandy, but you can use any moisture. Don't forget that pretty much even if you're pouring sherry, a lot of the alcohol content will evaporate because alcohol evaporates. So don't be too worried about alcohol unless you're feeding it sort of half an hour before you're serving it.
So Brenda's saying, I was wondering if I'm not blooming my onion powder for the ketchup for long enough. It gets clumpy in the fridge after I leave it in the fridge, but I still enjoy it.
It's a very small amount of onion powder, so maybe
is it nice and smooth when you mix it all up before you put it in the fridge?
It should be. The onion powder is only meant to be a very small amount. Just check that you're doing the right amounts, and check the onion powder is pure onion powder. Hasn't got corn flour. Sort of some of these less savoury companies put all sorts of filler in their powders, so you think you're getting onion powder, and what you're getting is sort of like a little bit of dried onion with heaps of corn flour in. That could be the problem.
Wyatt Life says, hey, what's up?
Nothing's up, Wyatt Life. It's all good.
Kitchen Library says, your Christmas pudding recipe is also a great one. I had no problems making it.
I've got, I think, 3 Christmas pudding recipes on the channel, and they're all slightly different because I do tend to tinker with them. I think the last couple I've used a little bit of cocoa powder, and that's unsweetened dark cocoa powder, just to add a little extra depth of flavour. So yeah, I mean, to me, Christmas pudding's really a huge part. We've actually got a Christmas pudding with us, Michelle and I, that we've been carrying now for 3 years.
Yeah. We are going to have it this year.
We're going to have it this year.
Plan.
I do like, if you're making Christmas puddings, by the way, do make 1 or 2 extra Christmas puddings, more than you need. So if you need 2 for Christmas, just make 4. Because last year's Christmas puddings, to me, they always taste better. And you literally just make the Christmas pudding the same way that I say, keep it in the bowl, cover it with a cloth, a little bit of grease paper. You can put foil over it and just keep it in a cool, dark place, and it will last for many years. Literally, I've had Christmas puddings that we've kept for longer than this. We've got one that's now we've actually got with us that's 3 years old.
So Raven Knoll said, Grandma used vodka 1 year. This is the talking about plumping up the fruits.
Yeah, I mean, vodka can work. I mean, the only problem with vodka, which is kind of, it's not the alcohol you're putting in the cake, but it's the flavour. And the flavour of vodka, if you imagine vodka essence, it's not the best sort of Christmas flavour. And when you put brandy or whiskey or sherry in, you're really getting that flavour. So if you smell a brandy or you smell a sherry, you're getting the flavours, not the alcohol. The alcohol will pretty much dissipate out of the cake. It's not going to be, so you can't really get drunk on a Christmas cake. There's little to no alcohol in it.
That's what Mona says. Brenda, just talking to Brenda and Raven, said those fruits died a good life for your cakes.
Yeah. Excuse me. Somebody in the comments this week on the Christmas cake recipe said that they often used to make a Christmas cake, but they find it easier to go and buy one from the shops because it's more expensive to make your Christmas cake at home. And I kind of said, I posed a question to them, and then I sort of put my point of view over, that generally if you buy a fruit cake in the supermarket, it's got like a handful of, it's quite often really pappy. Sometimes you get a dense one, but even with the dense ones, if you really dissect it up, you'll find there's very little fruit in it. And generally just a handful of raisins or sultanas in there. Maybe the odd glacé cherry just to make it look like it's got some fruit in it. And the rest of it's just flour and sugar and things. So yes, it can be quite cheap to buy a fruitcake from the supermarket, but it is not the same as a homemade fruitcake, not even close. And the reason why those cakes can be a lot cheaper is because they have no decent quality content inside them. Now, if you find a fruitcake in the supermarket that has all the sort of stuff that we used in our fruitcake recipe, it's probably going to cost $50, because you'll sometimes look in the supermarket or in a grocery store and you'll see a fruitcake and it's like, you know, $40, $50. You know, oh, it's crazy expensive. The reason it is because they've used really, really quality ingredients inside there. So yes, you can buy fruitcake cheaper in the supermarkets than you can make it yourself, but I guarantee you, you take that fruitcake and give it to me, I dissect it and make it myself, I can make it cheaper, because probably to replicate a generic supermarket fruitcake, all I need to use is like a handful of raisins, and the rest is just flour and sugar and a bit of flavoring in there. So I still stand by it. It is a little expensive to make a Christmas fruitcake, but it's a special occasion, and a homemade fruitcake is just fantastic. Or get your wallet out and spend a lot of money on a high quality fruitcake.
So Brenda says, I have a Christmas cake in the fridge perking, but you're right, quality control at home is better.
Yes.
And Straker says spiced rum.
Spiced rum is great in cakes. Tequila, Mr. B Natural says tequila, that's a great, you know, they're great flavors to add. Vodka will add a flavor as well. I mean, it's all dependent on what, but I think my favorite for Christmas would be brandy, and if not a brandy, probably a sherry or a whiskey. But
Raven North said Steve's rice recipe is perfect.
Thank you. And yes, it's a good thing to make your Straker. It's a good thing to make your fruitcake well in advance, a bit like a Christmas pudding. They do tend to get better with a little bit of age. What's happening is the sugars and the fruits are breaking down and releasing. So it's a bit like when you age meat, really. They kind of, you know, if you take a raisin, drop it in a glass of sherry, and pull it back out and eat it, yeah, you get some sherry on the outside. Say you pat off the sherry, and then you eat it, you won't taste anything. But if you soak that raisin in the sherry for a long period of time, it's going to plump, it's going to absorb some of the flavors. Now also when you mature a Christmas cake, everything sort of like eventually sort of like the liquids that you've fed the cake all bloom together, but also the structure of the fruits change a little bit. I don't want to say it, but like rotting the fruit. When a ripening is a better word, so the natural sugars develop. And there does come a point, particularly with a fruit cake, where it's not going to get much better. It's actually going to start to deteriorate. So whereas I think because of the richness of a Christmas pudding, you can keep it for a year or 2 years. I think 1 year is perfectly fine. It won't get much better. With a fruit cake, you probably only want to keep it about a year or so before it starts to lose some of its quality.
So Raven North says spiced rum goes nice with cherries.
Yeah.
And then Brenda says brandy butter on Christmas pudding is magic.
Brandy butter on Christmas pudding is magic, but my preference would be brandy butter, custard and ice cream on my Christmas pudding. Have I missed anything? And cream. Because often we get the option of having, because I love the sort of rich, heavy, dense stickiness of a Christmas pudding with the coldness of ice cream, but then I don't want to miss on those sort of flavors of brandy butter, and the cream just sort of brings it in together. A bit of ice cream if the Christmas pudding's hot. So it's good.
The Kitchen Library says the first time I tried Steve's brandy butter, I heard angels singing.
Well, brandy butter is something everybody should try to make at Christmas time. It kind of really it's one of those sort of Christmas things like figgy pudding. So I've got no coffee left. I might just
I'll put the kettle on. Mona says, has anyone heard of a burnt sugar cake or pudding? Apparently it gives that rich colour to Christmas cakes.
Yeah, burnt sugar is like treacle. So what the treacle is very similar. Treacle is basically a liquid burnt sugar, and it's that, and molasses, but less so. Treacle is more similar to a. So if you have, I have a cake recipe on my channel for Parkin. Parkin is an old Yorkshire cake, and actually it's made with treacle, and Oh, that is really lovely. Yorkshire Parkin, you should give that a try. But certainly using burnt sugars really sort of adds a smoky sort of richness to a cake, which I really like, or treacle. And I don't think I've ever made treacle tart on the channel, have I?
No, that would be nice. We were talking about the cracked pie similar to.
Yeah, cracked pie, which was a video by Christine Tossi in the US. I made cracked pie. Now I really like the cracked pie, but not coffee, Michelle.
No, I'm making tea.
Oh, good idea. Sorry about the noise. We're using the coffee machine to make tea. So cracked pie, when I made it, I thought, oh, this is nice. This is nice, but it reminds me of something. And what it reminds me of is treacle tart. And actually it is very similar to a treacle tart. So although, you know, kudos to and there's an American pie that's similar to a treacle tart that precedes the cracked pie, because cracked pie basically is just a yummy sort of gooey pie that's full of sugars and fats. So Yorkshire Parkin, yes, be natural, that is super. I mean, it's lovely, and I've got the video. I'll maybe get Michelle, let that soak for a little while, Michelle, because that tea's really weak. I'm having a cup of tea. Thank you, Michelle. She's an angel. Making me a cup of tea.
So Parkin, yeah.
So I'll get Michelle to put the Yorkshire Parkin link there if anyone wants to. There is a bird. Can you hear that? There's a bird in a cage. It's actually called what is it called?
Turquoise parrot.
Turquoise parrot. I was saying cyan. In my brain I was saying a cyan parrot. That sounds wrong because the colour is similar. Very beautiful. Google turquoise parrot. You'll see what I mean. Very pretty colours. So there's Michelle's put the link to the Yorkshire Parkin recipe. We're actually doing a little house sitting at the moment, Mona, for some dogs, and that's why we've been moving around a little bit, because we're sort of exploring Australia and just offering to either friends or even strangers sometimes that we look after their homes from if they're going away. So we haven't got this one is beanbag. This one, no, these are not our friends' little dogs. They're this beautiful little chihuahuas that we had on the show the other day. They are gorgeous. At the moment we are actually just looking after a place for a friend. Hey, Raggy.
Raggy said, I just watched the brandy butter video. Was that Zamboni? That's going to make it to our table this Christmas, Raggy.
Zamboni, that's Raggy speak.
Well, I guess that. I had to just be careful how I was saying it.
Yeah. Raggy, gotta add a bit of brandy butter to the Christmas table. That's always going to do well. Try and make it a little bit earlier if you can. And
test it. You know, you've got to have a bit of a
test it.
Once or twice.
Just make sure the brandy you're putting in there is good as well, Raggy. Don't just go throwing the brandy in without tasting it first. Make sure it's good. Raggy's got his own vocabulary, and those of you that don't know Raggy, I'm sure you do by now, get over and say hello to Raggy on his channel. He's a heap of giggle and fun, and just an all-round superb character. If you haven't bookmarked and hit the little bell on Raggy's channel so you get notification, because he'll keep you smiling. Pop, pop, getting a little frog, Raggy. Now, have I missed something there? Is Zamboni a word? Shell will check that for me. Because Raven North saying Zamboni on the ice rink, eh? Eh? Michelle's gone to make my tea, so she's away from the thing, and I haven't got a computer in front of me, so I can't check.
I'm coming.
You know what it's going to be? It's not raggy speak, it'll probably be a genuine word. Sounds like some sort of Italian stromboni or something, some sort of Italian food. Cup of tea, little bit of milk.
Also, there are electric resurfacers and edgers for ice. An ice resurfacer is a vehicle or hand-push device used to clean and smooth the surface of sheet ice. Usually in an ice rink, ice resurfacers are often referred to as zambonis. Zambonis. Hasn't got an E in it.
No, well, you see, it's funny, Raggy, because Raven North's just been on, and it's apparently, you know, those Zamboni, same pronunciation. Apparently, it's those machines. So you're picking up words as you go along life's colourful pathway. A bit like myself, picking up ridiculous words, repurposing them. It's apparently what that machine that goes across the ice rink afterwards and sort of flattens it down, you know, like the tractor they bring on.
Now, see, Raggy said Zamboni is my creation, meaning the very top drawer, I guess.
No, I read that he was defending, but I tell you what, Raggy, we pick up terminology, don't we? And we repurpose it and make it more appropriate. I mean, Zamboni is such a great word. It's got to be in our vocabulary. And if you're not always out of the ice, oh, there goes the Zamboni machine. You know, how often are you at an ice rink? So, well done, Raggy. Chuck it in there. Make it, own that word.
And Good Idea is going to use a fresh bottle of brandy for each recipe when he's testing it.
Good on you. Anyway.
So Mr. B Natural said, "Who's the worst chef on UK TV?"
I don't know. I don't watch much TV at all. They all seem quite good. I think they're all probably quite good. I do find, no, I'm not going to be critical of any of them. Some of them are a little faker than others, so I don't like the ones that are exceptionally fake and a little bit too syrupy. I like the ones that are very much more themselves, and yeah, and even some of the ones that are a little coarser can be a little syrupy in their own way, a little fake. So I like people to be really natural. So any last questions before we hit the road? I've got a cup of tea and half a lemon tart. I can't sit here eating all the time because then I'm very conscious that I'm going to have all food over my teeth. I've been watching Martin Van videos. Can you Google that for me, Michelle? I haven't a clue.
Yan.
Oh, Martin Yan.
Still don't know who it is.
It's not Yan Can Cook.
Martin Yan. Yes, Martin Yan is a Chinese-American chef and food writer. He has hosted his award-winning TV cooking show Yan Can Cook since 1982.
Oh, it's Yan. It is Yan, is it?
That's a long
I haven't
time
seen
ago.
Yan Can Cook for decades upon decades. Love the guy. I think he's such a nice... Now, there's a good example, I think, of a really good character. So Yan Can Cook, lovely guy. I didn't even know his name was Martin Yan. Shame on me. Is he still going? I think that I grew up, I was a small child watching Yan Can Cook.
Mr. B Natural says, okay, the best then.
I don't watch TV, and I haven't watched English TV for such a long time.
That's what Straker says. I'm in the US and don't watch TV either. I watch YouTube.
Exactly. I don't watch enough stuff to have an opinion on that. I must admit, I used to like the River Cottage guy, Hugh Fernley Whittingstall. Used to like his stuff. I actually liked the River Cottage because we actually had our own little farm and we were, you know, pretty much self-sufficient. We were producing our own meats and charcuterie and curing stuff. And River Cottage came along, and the guy was doing a very similar thing. I went to the UK at one stage for a trip. We went to where River Cottage was filmed, and I found out that the guy Hugh Fernley Whittingstall didn't even live at River Cottage. They used to just drive down there on the weekend from London and film the series, and then they'd go back, and so it was a kind of false story. And much as I really love the series, I kind of lost a little bit of the credibility of the whole series died for me, because there's also now a River Cottage Australia, and we also went to that farm, which is over at Tilba way, in towards above the lakes, and that also was an empty film set that nobody lived at, and they give this perception that they film. So that actually is a little disappointing, but then it's what you expect from TV, I guess.
So Mona says, I thought Zamboni was a fluffy sweet egg yolk custard made over a double boiler. And that's the other one, isn't it?
Yeah, I was thinking that the words. That's why I say the words sound very similar, and I know what you're thinking of.
So Brenda says, are you planning any breads like Barra Birth? So I looked up what Barra Birth.
But no, that's Irish or Welsh, Scottish,
possibly
Celtic.
It's sometimes known as speckled bread. Enriched with dried fruit, traditionally flavoured with tea, dried fruits and mixed spices.
I think what will happen now with the channel as things sort of progress is we will try to feature more the foods of where we are. Some of you may wonder why we travel so much, and so do we. I think a lot of it is just we've always travelled a lot, and it's hard to stop. So I think we will probably just keep travelling and keep visiting places. As I get closer to the beginning of next year, I'll let you know a little bit more about what our plans are for next year, because we're not 100% concrete, but we've got some really fantastic plans, loosely plans that are going to be food-wise are going to be just phenomenal. So you're going to be seeing foods from many parts of the world, and it's going to be pretty exciting, but it's not all planned yet. I keep waving my little note pen.
Say good night to the kitchen library. She says it's 9:20 here in Trinidad. I'm going to get some sleep now.
Good night.
And then Raven North said, do you have a video on cinnamon rolls?
Yes, I think we do. It's an old one.
Very old one.
But I'll get Michelle to put the link up. Really nice gooey cinnamon rolls, because I always like things to try. I try to make the recipes the best of what we. So nobody likes a cinnamon roll where it looks like a bit of white bread with some a little bit of sugar on top. You want it to be sort of sticky and gooey and just delicious. So I'm pretty sure my cinnamon roll recipe was pretty good. If you like cinnamon rolls, by the way, and I'll get Michelle to put this link up as well, you probably like Lardy Cake. Oh, yes. And Lardy Cake is a traditional English cake made with lard. If I had the choice between a Lardy Cake and a cinnamon roll, I'd go for a Lardy Cake every time. I just think it's got more flavour. So check that out. Night, Mona. Oh no, you're saying night to
kitchen.
To kitchen, to the kitchen library. Night. Why do sweet rolls get stiff the next day?
Well, all bread does, doesn't it?
All bread gets stiff the next day. It's basically you've got a problem with, and it won't be it's the same with normal rolls. Is that the Lardy Cake? Yeah.
Yeah.
Lardy Cake. If you haven't had Lardy Cake before, check out Lardy Cake. It is sublime. It has to be made with plenty of liquid. It's also gooey, but it has the added flavors of lard. So, but basically any bread, whether it's a sweet roll, it's all to do with the water evaporating out of the bread, which makes it get a little stale. So there gets a point where you can't really recover those, but you can with a sweet bread. You can actually slightly heat it in the microwave, or even better in an oven, and the sugars, it will start to just break the sugars back down, so they get back to their syrupy point, and it can be quite nice. Whereas if you heat a regular bread, you're probably just going to reduce the moisture out even more and make it dry.
She says, I'm in the USA.
Or just one last thing, or buy some of the supermarket breads here, they never go off, and keep them for months. I don't know what they're doing to them.
I'm just going to say Boda said hi, hey, and then he's just given us a super chat.
Oh, Boda, thank you very much for your beautiful...
I'm thinking of getting some KFC.
You're getting hungry, are you? I'm getting hungry. I'm sat here in front of half a lemon tart, which I'm going to have another bite of. Thank you, Boda. It's always sweet when somebody gives us a super chat. Do appreciate it. We'll get a nice coffee with it tomorrow when we go out.
So Brenda says, I'm in the USA using their all-purpose flour. That's making the sweet rolls. So probably need a bread flour because it's not getting the... Brenda said, why do sweet rolls get stiff the next day? And then you answered and she said, I'm in the USA using their AP flour.
Well, if you're using all-purpose flour for rolls...
Yes, that's what I understand it to be.
Okay, I'm not sure we fully understand, but don't use all-purpose flour. Try to use a bread flour. If you use an all-purpose flour, you get no gluten, so you get no elasticity, or you get very little gluten, so you don't get so much elasticity in the little bubbles that appear inside a bread, the crumb as they call it. Each of those bubbles, if it's got a little envelope of gluten around it, like an elastic band, makes it softer, makes it chewier, but it also tends to stay fresher. It keeps its structure better. If you have no gluten, it becomes crumbly. It goes like a scone. The next day it'll be like a scone or scone and just break up. So Boda, you thinking of going out for a KFC, or you're making your own KFC at home?
Raven North said this Raven craves pizza.
Do you know, when we were in Malaysia, we met a lovely lady called Angie, and she made what we called Malaysian fried chicken. And it was like a Kentucky fried chicken, but they add a few little spices in there. Did she put coconut milk in the batter as well, if I remember rightly? Oh, it's one of the nicest fried chickens. It always is when someone makes you something special, though, isn't it? It's kind of always that that little bit just ticks that box a little bit deeper.
Say goodnight to Raggy. So this is the first time I've had the pleasure of staying with you this long. Night here. I'll be in rehearsal from about 11 till 3 a.m. but I'm free now. Party on, kiddos.
Party on, Raggy. Keep producing those fun videos and entertaining everybody. Get across to Raggy and make sure you hit the little bell on Raggy so you get a notification and get in there and just watch some of his stuff and bring a smile to your face.
So I'm going to put the Nanya fried chicken up, but it wasn't Angie's one, it was Nick's from when we made it.
Was it when we made it with Nick?
Yeah.
Okay, so we also, yeah, that's fine. We also went, Nanya is a community in Malaysia. So, Palut? No, I forget the name of it. Rumen. There's a fantastic place we ate in Malaysia, and I went to Nick's place. You'll see it on the video. Michelle's book. Ruma, which was a Malay Nanya place. The lady, hopefully this video will show it. Nick's mum made the most delicious Nanya fried chicken, and she shows us the recipe and how to make it. And I think I make it on the channel, but yeah, it's good. I had made that video on Malaysian fried chicken, Boda, and Michelle's going to put it up now. You can check it out. It was there was this older lady, beautiful character, and she was the mother of the guy I went to visit, and they had a restaurant in Malaysia, and she shows us how she makes her Nanya fried chicken. Oh, so good. It was really, I don't know, I was finger licking good.
Raven says your adventure in Lang Lang has me wanting to try pho.
Have I done a recipe for pho? Don't think I have.
No, we tried a good in Vietnam.
So the little restaurant where we went to visit in Lang Lang, just coincidentally they were experimenting making pho gar, which is a pho, P-H-O. It's a Vietnamese. They have it in many parts of Southeast Asia, predominantly Vietnamese dish. Really delicious, and it's all about the broth. You know, it's all about making a really good consommé or broth, like a thin chicken broth. You get a really good broth. Get chicken bones, get the whole chicken carcass, and boil it away with maybe some vegetables, a little bit of seasoning in there, and make a really good broth. And then you're adding that broth in with chicken, some vegetables, and it sort of floats, and some noodles in a big bowl, and it's so refreshing. It's such a refreshing and delicious dish. So yes, you should. And I haven't made it.
No, just put a link up to the Vietnamese food, because we ate a nice pho, the 10 best Hanoi street food.
Yeah, I think actually I don't know exactly which. It's fairly early on in that video. I'm having a pho gar, which is gar is chicken, gai in Chinese, gar in Vietnamese, and it's pronounced pho. They sort of pho, although most Westerners would say pho. So I haven't made it. Maybe if we can get back to Vietnam, we can find somebody who can take me into their kitchen. We can cook it together, and then it'll give you the whole experience. You can sort of see how it's put together. That's the way I'd like the channel to progress. We get into people's kitchens and we show you how it's made on the road, and we will see. But there'll be a lot of travel around these videos as well. So we've been going a lot longer than I anticipated.
2 hours.
I might call it to an end, although if anyone's got any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any questions about the title of this video, sourdough starters, sourdough recipes, sourdough breads, and just in case, there were 2 questions. One was from Singapore. Their sourdough was dying a little bit early on, so I was saying to them it's possible the temperatures weren't right, maybe too much chlorine in the water. So there's some tips. You'll have to go back to about an hour ago and see the full answer to that. And the other one was about how to convert a sourdough recipe, a recipe that asks for regular yeast, and you want to use your sourdough, and it's all about the ratio of water to flour, or the hydration level. So for example, if you were doing a French baguette, I think it's about 65% hydration. You would take that recipe, and you know that your starter already is 50% flour, 50% water by weight. Go back and see my comments. But you see, you can convert any recipe you like, any bread recipe you like, into a sourdough. Just be aware of the fact that if you put 100 grams of starter in with there, you're actually adding 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. And accordingly then to your original recipe, you have to deduct 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour out to your original recipe. And then you'll have the same amount of liquid, and your bread will work perfectly. A lot of sourdough recipes, traditional sourdough recipes though, quite often are wetter. Frequently we use a wetter dough, and the reason they do that is because they're using a slow fermentation process, so an overnight process. So actually that's another important point, maybe I haven't covered that. So the fermentation process they often use is slower, and they make a slightly wetter mix, because then with a lot of water in your flour, it allows those 2 proteins, glutenin and gliadin, to kind of like marry together and get that stretchiness. And if the flour is too dry, you have 2 proteins in flour, glutenin and gliadin, and they kind of don't want to hook together when the flour is too dry.
So Andrea says, I've been making sourdough for a couple of years. It's a tough animal, can't kill it. I keep it in the fridge, sometimes a couple of weeks without feeding.
Hey Andres, yes, you can. This one, 2 years. in a can, fully dried out, still smells great. One day I'm going to rehydrate this and we're going to cook with it. But it's already been 2 years, so don't be surprised if it's like 4 years from now and I'm going, oh, remember that sourdough starter I dried out in Sicily? It's now 6 years ago. That'll be interesting to see if that comes back to life.
So Raven North says, I'm excited for the travel bits. And Mona said, would love the travel and cooking combination on local food where you go. Thanks, Stephen Michelle.
Well, that's the plan, to spend a little less time in the kitchen so I can get outside a bit more and show you what's going on around us.
Because you've got, what, over 700, nearly 800 recipes on YouTube
Yeah,
now?
there's close to 800 cooking recipes on the channel. I think it's quite enough to keep people covered for most events. Clearly, Piccalilli still has to be done. There's still lots I have to do for.
So Annie's asking, how much is 100 grams of sourdough starter compared to fresh yeast?
There isn't really, you can't make that comparison because it's not, there isn't an equivalent sourdough starter to fresh yeast. It's all about, I mean,
realistically, if you're doing a sourdough bread and you haven't made one before, start with a sourdough starter recipe rather than a fresh yeast or dried yeast recipe. Don't try and convert, because you won't know what it's meant to look like.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don't start your life by making things difficult for yourself by trying only to add sourdough starters to regular recipes, because you'll get, the more you cook, the more familiar you'll get. But the problem is, you see, you can if a loaf says it wants a teaspoon of dried yeast, instant dried yeast, for example, or maybe a tablespoon of fresh yeast, it's giving you those calculations then based on how long it wants you to let it rise for. So if a recipe says use a teaspoon of dried yeast, mix it up and let it aside till it doubles in size. That's the thing. If you put a teaspoon of dried yeast in, get it to the right temperature and you stretch it, the gluten's developed, you put it aside, it might double in size in an hour, 45 minutes even, it might double in size. You could make that same recipe with just a little sprinkle, like a quarter of a teaspoon, less than a quarter of a teaspoon of dried yeast. Same recipe, it would still work perfectly well, but it will take longer to double in size because the yeast itself is a living organism. It's actually a little like a little bug, let's say, and it's constantly splitting. The cells are constantly growing. It's a growing organism. So if you set that aside and let it double in size, it might take 4 hours to double in size, but in 4 hours time there'd be just as much yeast in that loaf as the one you put a teaspoon of yeast into. So it's how long it takes your yeast to multiply or to grow. So I've seen a wetter, often with a wetter loaf, like a focaccia, for instance. Focaccia is a particularly high hydration, a lot of liquid. You can use a lot less yeast. Sometimes people might think, oh, I'm doing a focaccia, I want all those bubbles in there, so I'll put a big teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of yeast in. It's not necessary. The yeast will, in a very liquid dough like that, the yeast will expand and grow very quickly as long as the temperatures aren't too cold and as long as there's lots of flour for it to eat. And you're getting little yeast farts, basically, little yeast bubbles, belches, let's say belches rather than farts. So you're getting little yeast belches that are sort of like puffing up, little carbon dioxide bubbles that are breaking up. So it really is, does that make sense? The amount of yeast is kind of almost irrelevant to how long you allow it to prove for. And if a recipe tells you a certain amount of yeast, it's because they've calculated that a teaspoon of yeast takes an hour or so to rise at the perfect temperature. You could put more yeast in if you want it to rise quicker, but there comes a point where the yeast starts to add a flavour to the bread that you might not want. Was that helpful? Was that helpful, Annie? Did that make sense? It did to me, but sometimes what makes sense up here doesn't necessarily come out here.
No, it was making sense to me.
Was making sense to Michelle. That's good. So any last questions before we wrap up? Somebody else has just dropped in. Say hello. Bread's fascinating. Baking is fascinating. Thank you, Annie. That's good. Because it's a very simple thing. And I know that I do bang on a little bit about using weights and measures. It really helps. Once you've actually been baking for a while, I can make a loaf without weights and measures because I know exactly how I want my flour to feel. And that's why I also think making bread with your hands is so much more practical than sticking it in a machine and mixing it, because if you never actually get your hands on the bread and sort of knead it, you don't know if it's too wet or it's too dry, because inside a mixer with a dough hook on, if you're doing it with a mixer and a dough hook, almost certainly you're better off using weights and measures, because yeah, it's going to be complicated for you to know when it's gone wrong. If you bake a lot and you make bread a lot, there are people who say, oh, I don't need to use scales, and I sometimes don't use scales when I'm making bread, because I know exactly what it feels like when I need to add a little bit extra flour or a little bit. So when I was out camping in the wilderness just now, and we were making loaves of bread quite frequently and making bread out on the road, I didn't have scales, but I know how it feels.
So Kenzie B says thanks.
You're welcome, Kenzie.
And Boda says, ever made Asian style beef jerky using Asian spices for the brine, adding them to the jerk before they dehydrate?
Yes, I have. I've used, you can use teriyaki sauces and you can use Asian spices you can, as long as you, when you're making your jerky, you have, I'm not sure the exact quantities, I have got that written somewhere, but as long as you've got the salts to start to draw out the moisture from the meat. The first thing you do when you're making jerky is you've got to get a certain amount of the liquid out of the meat. And sometimes it's almost counterintuitive, because there are some meats that you soak in water in order to draw the moisture out. But as long as the water has the right amount of salt in it, in other words, it's a brine, if you take a lump of beef or a lump of pork and you put it into a brined water, just before you put it in, you weigh it, and say it's a kilo in weight, say it's a pound in weight. You pop it into that water and you soak it. You would think it would get heavier. It actually gets lighter, because the salt in the water, as long as it's a brine, will leach the liquid out. So when you take that out a day or 2 days later, weigh it again, you'll find it'll have gone down in weight. It won't have actually absorbed the water, it will have actually expelled water into the water. It's an equilibrium, it's a sort of osmosis between the juices in the meat and the juices in the brine. So as long as you've got salt in there, you can pretty much use any spices you want. The reason we pull the water out of the meat is because the only thing that let the meat go bad or to spoil the meat is if it has too much water in it, because the bacteria that makes meats spoil live and thrive in a H2O environment. So you draw the water out and then you start to dry the meats out. And yes, I've done it with teriyaki sauces. I've done it with certain Asian spices, Asian 5 spices. It can be really fascinating to play with it. But you do have to make sure that you've got the right amount of salt content, and that you take that initial process of just sucking the water out of the meat.
So Raven North says, how about some thumbs up for Steve and Michelle? Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thanks. Hit that thumbs up. Let's get some. Anybody who hasn't hit that thumbs up now, and if you're watching on a mobile device, I'm sure you can find that thumbs up. Tickety-boo. I should say it really earlier on when people are coming in.
Yeah. And Annie says, have you ever tried caraway in your bread? It is good.
I love caraway in bread. I think actually, have we got caraway in the pumpernickel bread?
I believe so, yes.
I think in the pumpernickel bread I use caraway. It's quite a... It's funny with caraway and... what's the other seed that's very... Fennel and caraway. I've never been a big fan of licorice. I can't really I can eat almost anything, but I'm not a big fan of, you know, the black licorice.
Which is good because I love it.
Michelle loves it, so if we ever get any licorice, she gets the licorice. And caraway and fennel are very licoricey in their flavour, and but I think they work really well in breads. So even adding a little bit of caraway seed or fennel seed in with a flatbread. So if you look at those, I'm always making flatbreads. I've made them even here where we are now. We've made them 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
We make flatbreads and just bake them on a griddle or pan. Quite often put caraway in. Now the numbers are starting to drop. People are probably it's getting late. I think I've answered most of the questions.
Alberta just has ever had pork jerky? If so, is it any good?
I've never had pork jerky, and I'm a little bit wary of pork being. Now, this is funny because yes, I have. I'm going to flip. I've never had pork jerky, and I'd be a bit wary about doing a pork jerky. And I'm almost, as I'm saying it, thinking what a stupid thing that is to have said, because guanciale, pancetta, they're all pork jerkies technically. And I've made hundreds and hundreds of Parma hams, guanciale, pancettas. So yes, I mean, air-cured hams are technically beef jerkies. And I've got a recipe for a guanciale, which is the pig's cheek. It's made from the pig's cheek. And for those doubters out there, particularly I get a lot of grief in the US who say you've got to cook your beef to make jerky. This is actually, even today, I've probably had 20 comments on that video telling me that the beef has to be cooked. Guanciale, pancetta, Parma hams. These are not cooked meats. You don't even put them up to temperature. You take that pork, and pork is notoriously for bacteria. It can be very dangerous, and that's why I was a little bit cautious, because we always say about cooking your pork all the way through, not letting it be too pink, which is something that's come around about. Any of those Parma hams you have sliced in the delicatessen, that is raw pork, completely raw pork. It's not heat treated in any way whatsoever. It's not heat. It's just had the salts to draw the meat out, and it's delicious. So yes, although I don't really think there is such a thing technically as pork jerky.
So say goodbye to Cynthia. It's dinner time.
Bye, Cynthia.
I just put the jerky recipe up, and I'm going to put the guanciale up.
No, I tend to say, Raven North, I think I'm probably always a little bit confused by the word pork jerky, as we all should be, because it's not kind of a thing. You do, jerky generally is made traditionally with game meats, beef, can be made with deer.
Raven North says, I've had moose jerky and turkey jerky, both are very good.
Yeah. And even fowl jerky like chicken and turkey jerky, I think it sounds good, turkey jerky, so they kind of say it's turkey jerky, but it's really just cured jerky turkey meat. I think once you start getting into the rounds of curing, air drying porks, their names change. So
pancetta on seasoned rice is pork sushi. That's what Raven North's saying.
Yes. And Boda said that eats raw pancetta. I mean, I eat raw cured
I don't like
pork.
how it tastes cooked. Okay.
Yeah, you can cook it. I mean, when you take guanciale, which is the pork cheek, I generally always cook it because it's a very, very fatty. The Italians also make a cured pork called lardo. I'll say it in my English accent. Lardo, L-A-R-D-O, and it is just a lump of the white fat, generally from the loin or the softer fats, and they just cure it, and that's really very nice.
And Mona saying good night. Thank you both for wonderful chat and hints and tips. Very much appreciated. Night, everyone.
Night night.
Night night.
Be good. I am going to wrap up very shortly. So, yes, I've actually got. I would like to, and probably talk about that if we got a lot of trips planned next year. A really exciting, fun time, and there's possibly something we're planning that I can't discuss with you, only because it might not happen.
Once it's all happening,
it will happen. We rarely do. Somebody was saying the other day, oh, you've got to always have write down, what was the thing they were saying, always have targets. And I thought, oh, that's a good point. Somebody said if you haven't got targets in life, you really should have targets. And I thought, when I was younger in business and things, I used to think, these sort of inspirational talkers, the motivational talkers, they make sense, if you don't have targets. But I think actually the problem is we've always had targets and we've always worked to them, that we don't ever consider ourselves targetless. So we've always got plans, we've always got things done, and we generally achieve them.
Yeah, we might move a target.
Yeah, we don't mind moving our targets. And then that's not because we can't achieve them, but because something more exciting comes up. And that's the only reason I'm not discussing them. Anyway, thank you everybody that's come in today. It's been wonderful. Boda, thank you for the super chat earlier on. That was really nice of you.
So Raven North says, target 1, wake up. Boda says, the beauty of food is that you'll never run out of recipes. Absolutely.
Never run out of recipes. Never run out of ideas. There's so much out there. Anyway, love to you all. Have a wonderful week. We've got some Christmas recipes planned for the weekend. There's some really great recipes. They are older recipes. I am redoing them. You're going to love them. You're going to have a fantastic Christmas if you follow these recipes we're going to be doing. Hope you enjoy. Take care. Share the love. Oh.
You did miss it, Tammy.
Tammy, you did miss. We're just about to wind up. Tammy, we've been talking about all sorts of things, but I am going to have to wind it up, sweetheart. Thank you for dropping in. You've missed my Oreo cookie, and look what I've got left of my poor little lemon tart.
And that's all going to be appearing in a vlog that you're going to be doing soon.
It will appear in a vlog that we're doing soon. So Tammy, I hope you have a wonderful week. Sorry you missed it. Anyone else that comes in now, we are going to hang up. Love to you all. Be good, and we'll see you in the next video. Love from Australia. I can't reach my click button.